Hey everyone, this is Mark Ryan coming at you with another video, and today we're taking a look at AD's new book. It's called Social Justice Pharisees. Now, who is AD Robles anyways? A lot of you guys probably don't know who he is. He's a guy who's been talking about critical race theory for probably about 3 years now, at least. He's been talking about it since before it was even popular, before we saw it in the news all the time. We see news stories of how crazy CRT is all the time. And so he started noticing it back when Matt Chandler started talking about white privilege. He was at the MLK conference, and you started just seeing the critical race theory stuff just oozing out of Matt Chandler, and AD didn't like it. And then over time, like, he's confrontational, and he calls evangelicalism like Big Eva. But anyways, I'll put a link to AD's channel in the description below. AD is a guy, he doesn't hold any punches. He doesn't mince words. He tells it like it is. And so a lot of people tell AD, hey, you've got a tone problem. Hey, we like what you're saying. We don't like how you're saying it, things like that. So keep that in mind. Now, AD said on his channel several times, hey, I've written this book in a way you could give to your best friend. You could give to anyone. It introduces them into critical race theory, social justice, and how to think about it biblically. And he said, I've written it in a way that it's not as confrontational. I've toned it down. It's not as spicy as he is on his YouTube channel. So we'll talk about that in a different video because I kind of have a different take on that. Now, chapter 6 is what I want to talk about. I think it's the most thought-provoking chapter that there is, and it is on the sin of partiality, or, hey, that's racism. And so the verse that he kind of is the anchor verse for him is Leviticus 19:15. You must not deal unjustly in judgment. You must neither show partiality to the poor, nor honor the rich. You must judge your fellow citizen fairly. And so AD goes on to lay out the argument that, hey, racism, it's the sin of partiality. We're going to treat you differently because of your skin color. But hey, that's a good definition, I think. Racism, sin of partiality. Hey, you're a different skin color, ethnicity, whatever. We're going to treat you unjustly and differently because we don't like the color of your skin. And so if you follow critical race theory, a lot of them will say, hey, if you're black, you cannot be racist if you're black. Dr. Eric Mason, who is a pastor, will say, hey, if you're black, you cannot be a racist. And AD and the Bible just thoroughly rejects that assertion. Because first of all, as Christians, God determines what everything is. God determines what murder is. God determines what stealing is. God determines what adultery is. It is whatever God says it is. Racism, hey, it is whatever God says it is. And so under critical race theory, they twist and pervert definitions. They wordsmith, so they change what a word means to mean whatever they want it to mean. So racism means something entirely different than what God has determined it to mean. Same thing with white supremacy and all the other words that critical race theorists twist. And so I do like that AD just comes out, defines what racism is. Now, the interesting thing, though, I think, is that AD applies this verse not to just the courtroom setting, but outside of it. For instance, hey, that final day where you stand before God, God's not going to say, hey, are you rich or are you poor? How much money do you have? All right, you don't have that much money, you're going to hell. Or, hey, are you, you're a man, so you're going to heaven. You're a woman, so you're going to hell. Things like that. God's impartial. That doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is, are you clothed in the righteousness of Jesus Christ? And justice in the Old Testament, it works the same way in that it's never of, oh, hey, are you poor? We're going to show favoritism to you in the justice setting. Are you rich? We're going to show you favoritism. But AD Robles basically points out that in the courtroom setting, it's not okay to say, hey, you're a minority, so we're going to favor you in justice. Or, hey, you're white, we'll favor you in justice. That doesn't work with God. You can't say, hey, you're rich, you've got a lot of influence, so we're going to decide in your favor because of that. We're going to, the balances, we're going to tilt them in your favor unjustly because you're rich because you're poor. Either way, it works both ways. Because you're male or female, any of those things, you cannot do, skin color included. Now, the thought-provoking sentence that I'm just going to read from his book is this: a Christian is not allowed to show partiality in the charity that they provide others. Now, basically, AD is talking about colleges and universities. The SBC had something. It sounds like a diversity project or something, and so they're offering scholarships. And hey, if you're white, you don't qualify. AD argues, hey, they're showing partiality to others based on skin color, which is racism, is his argument. And he would say, hey, a scholarship, it should be available to anyone, regardless of skin color or even gender. The thought-provoking thing is that, hey, AD asserts in his book, if you're a Christian or if you're anyone, because God's law, it applies to Christians and non-Christians, you're not allowed to show partiality to anyone whatsoever when you do charity. That's an assertion that he makes, and it's kind of vague. Maybe you should be more specific and stuff. But I thought that really we just focus on that and talk into that for a second. Now, AD is saying, hey, partiality, it doesn't just apply to the courtroom, it applies to charity as well. And I wonder if he'd apply that to other areas such as like businesses. Can you apply that to sports teams? How do you apply that consistently with everything? If you have a sports team and it says, hey, it's for men only, well, is that showing partiality? Or if you're a college, would you have to say, hey, we're offering sports teams, but not just for men, but for women? And if there's 10 men's sports teams, then there's 10 women's sports teams. Would it be the sin of partiality to say, no, we only have men's sport teams, or vice versa? That'd be a good question. Would it be partiality to say, hey, there's only a men's football team, no women can be on it? Is that the sin of partiality? And so part of the weakness of the book is that AD, he defines racism as the sin of partiality. He doesn't really define what partiality is, or what it is not. And to have a really good definition of something, hey, you have to define what it isn't. Now, let me give an example, though. We have a really generous guy in Montana who is a billionaire, it seems like. And he said, hey, I'm going to give full ride scholarships to anyone who graduates from this particular high school that I graduated from, just in small town rural Montana. They get a full ride scholarship. And I'm sure there's a few different requirements and everything, but it excludes the other towns in Montana. Hey, they're not eligible. They can't get it. It's just for that one town. Well, is that the sin of partiality? Or, he goes on to build a high school, funds the whole thing with his money. The high school gets $40+ million to build a high school. The junior high doesn't get anything. The elementary schools doesn't get anything. Well, is that the sin of partiality? And so you have to be really precise with your definitions. And I wish AD was more precise with his definitions. If he says, hey, I want to double the salary of every high school teacher, and just double their salary and stuff. Well, he's not doing that to the junior high teachers or the elementary school teachers. Is that the sin of partiality? I don't think so. But hey, maybe you could argue that it is. And beyond that, hey, my dad, he raised a family of 5 and he made $13 an hour or so. I think probably $12 an hour. No health insurance, no, vision, no dental, no benefits really, except for vacation. Well, part of what happens out of that is I go to college and I get a Pell Grant where, hey, if your family has a low income, then we're going to give you free money. We'll give you this grant of $1,000. Well, is something like that, is that the sin of partiality? Because we see that in our colleges and universities where people, if their income is below a certain threshold, then they get a grant that middle class or richer folks, they don't get that. It seems like, hey, AD would argue that is the sin of partiality, and that's not okay. And I probably agree with him to an extent there. I thought I'd read this quote, and it's AD's talking about giving scholarships to minorities and women basically, and showing partiality there. He says, "This may not seem like a big deal to you, but I assure you it is." And so, hey, I agree. Like, it is a big deal. And with AD's definition of, hey, you can't show partiality with giving charity. If you had someone who says, hey, I want to give a full ride scholarship to someone who doesn't have two pennies to rub together, someone who they're going through bankruptcy or something like that. I want to be generous to them and give to them a scholarship or whatever. It seems like AD would be saying, hey, like, that's the sin of partiality. You can't do that. That angers God. That's sin against God. And honestly, if it's sin, like, that's enough to damn your soul in hell forever. And so I'm not there. I don't get how you can exegete that verse and apply it to not just the courtroom setting, which that's the context of that verse, but he's saying, hey, anytime there's charity involved, we're always going to apply that verse there. And so if you have the means, if you're wealthy, you see a poor person, they don't have two pennies to rub together, and you say, hey man, they're poor. My heart's burdened for them. I want to give them a full ride scholarship. Well, that's partiality, it seems like AD would argue. And that would anger God. I'm not there. I don't think so. I think you have to define partiality better than how AD does it. And define it, hey, this is what it is not, and this is what it is. But beyond that, hey, say that you're a member of a church, and you say, hey, I want to give a scholarship to a senior. He's going to a college. Well, if you say, hey, they have to be a member of a Baptist church, well, is that partiality? And is God angry with that? If you say, hey, only people from an Assembly of God church are eligible for the scholarship, then, hey, is God angry with you there? Is that partiality? It seems like it would be, because you're excluding all these other denominations and everything, all these other Christians even. Or say that, hey, you're in a college and you have a women's ministry going on, and there's someone that says, hey, I want to provide a scholarship for someone who is in the women's ministry, who's just really shown leadership and dedication and things like that. Well, with AD's definition, there's partiality there. There's sin going on there. God is angered by that, which I just don't see. I don't see how you could assert that. If someone said, hey, I want to give a scholarship to a pastor, well, now, in a lot of denominations, pastors have to be men with certain character and qualifications. But it excludes anyone who's not a man and anyone who is not called to be a pastor then. Is that showing partiality? Because now all of a sudden, no women qualify for that scholarship, only men. And only those with the calling to be a pastor. Under AD's definition, it seems like, yes, that would have to be partiality. And so is it a sin to give a full ride scholarship to someone who is a calling to the ministry? Well, no, it simply is not. And so I guess my criticism is that AD's definition, I think it's too sloppy, it's too muddy. It has to be refined. There has to be more to it. You have to say what partiality is not and what it is. But let's go even further. Say that you have sports teams and someone says, hey, I play basketball for the Trinity Lions or whatever, and I just really love that team. I have an attachment to it. I want to provide a basketball scholarship for whoever scored the highest amount of points for the Trinity Lions, which was a men's basketball team. Well, no women are eligible for that scholarship then. Hey, is that showing partiality? But yet it's based on merit and things like that. And so, hey, that was fun kind of dishing it out to AD there. I know he can take it. He's man enough to take that and stuff. But hey, the other part of the book that shines through that's really good is that AD kind of confronts evangelicals who just naturally assume, hey, racism. So with George Floyd, that was racism. And with Arbery, that was racism. And Breonna Taylor, that was racism. Well, hey, like, you need to prove your stuff. You need facts and evidence and stuff like that. Prove your case. You can't just go around assuming certain things are racism. Like, you need evidence, and things like that. And culturally, I think everyone assumed that, who was it? Derek Chauvin. Hey, he's a racist. Well, you need facts and evidence, and hey, prove it. Where's your evidence for that? And so that's a good part of the book that he just shines through. You got to prove stuff. You can't just assume it. And critical race theory, hey, it assumes racism is everywhere. Racism, it's like a fish swimming in water. You're surrounded by racism. Everything is racist. And so props to AD, because he does point that out, that the new social justice movement, hey, they assume everything's racist. Well, under God's law, you actually have to prove stuff. There has to be evidence. And so it's unrighteous. Critical race theory is unrighteous. It's satanic in that hey, the facts be damned, kind of thing. But hey, in the comments below, tell me what you think about the sin of partiality and scholarships. Is it okay to give a scholarship based on race, based on gender, and say, hey, I want a scholarship towards only pastors or missionaries. Everyone else is excluded. When I went to college, I got a scholarship that was only eligible from people from Montanans, and any other state, hey, you're excluded. Well, is that partiality? And does God hate that because you're showing partiality to Montanans against any other state and country? Tell me in the comments below. Am I being unfair to AD? Maybe people who watch his content will see this. Maybe I'm being unfair. I don't think so. But with that, I'll see you in the next video.